We continue now at the top of Daf Lamed Tesamid Beis Meseches Zevachim. This is Zevachim Daf 39b. The Gemara continues a brisa. The brisa is discussing the par helam davar shel tzibor and the other kinds of karbanos, which are known as the inner karban chatases. Those are the ones where the blood is applied inside of the Beis HaMikdash, and essentially the brisa is comparing them all to one another. And so the brisa continues, kasher asa lapar. Again, the pasuk says kasher asa lapar ze par kohen Mashiach. This refers to the par brought by the Kohen Gadol. And hachatos, when it says hachatos, elu si'irei avodas kochavim. That refers to the goats that are brought for a communal sin of avodah zarah. And Rashi explains, kasher asa lapar lav kasher asa kadarish. This part of the brisa is not darshaning from the words kasher asa, sharei kfar sirsu v'darshu. That already in the previous summon they rearranged the pasuk and darshan that. Ela lapar kadarish. Rather, right here the brisa is darshaning the word lapar. And Zeh par kohen Mashiach. Again, the word lapar comes to include the par of the Kohen Gadol. Ha'amr beparsha Elyon, that said in the parsha above. V'lo nichval, there that was not repeated. L'kach chazer v'hikishan yachad. That's why we go ahead over here and compare them to one another. Shalimed ikuv chisar matanosa mizah. We're learning again that there's a requirement. You can't be lacking any of the applications of blood when it comes to the par kohen Mashiach, just like the par helam davar shel tzibor. Elu sirei avodas kochavim, and then again hachatas comes to include the goat of avodah zarah lahavion bedin par helam davar. Again, that's going to have the same halach as the par helam davar shel tzibor. Liton hazoya ala paroches. There's going to be a requirement to sprinkle the blood on the paroches, the curtain that divides the kodesh from the kodesh kadashim. Vial mizbeach hazav, and also the applications of the blood on the inner golden mizbeach. V'lisarev chutz l'shalosh machanos. Also that it should be burned outside of the three camps. Lefisha b'mekomo lo nispar shvel chosav, because when it's brought down in its place, these particular halachas are not explained. B'parsha shlach lecha and parsha shlach. And before continuing with the brisa, we'll take a look at the full pasuk. V'yasal apar kasher asal afarachatos ken yasalo v'chibar aleim hakoin v'nislach lehem. Again, these are the words in the pasuk that the brisa is darshaning. And the brisa continues, Yachol, one might think, shani mar ba'af se'irei haragalim. Maybe I should also include the goats that are brought on the holidays, u'se'irei roshei chodashim, and the goats that are brought on Rosh Chodesh. Rashi explains, Yachol shani mar b'se'irei haragalim v'roshei chodashim lios penimim. Maybe they should also be inner carbon chatases v'nisrafin, and maybe they also should be burned. Maybe I should include those as well. And to that, the Gemara says, Talmud Lomar, the pasuk says lo, it says the word lo, and so therefore that's an exclusion. We do not include the se'irei haragalim and the se'irei roshei chodashim. Rashi explains, Talmud Lomar ken yaseh lo, lo zev lo lachar, means that's the halachas for this, and not for others. Essentially, it is an exclusion. And the brisa continues, Umar Ra'isa l'rabo says elu, ulahotzi aselu. How do I know that I include these and I exclude those? And to that, the brisa says, Achar shariba hakasav umiyit. Once we see that the pasuk includes and also the pasuk excludes, marbani aselu. So I'm going to include these shemechaprin al averas mitzvah yadua, because these are all an atonement for an avera of a mitzvah of something that was known that the avera was done. Meaning, for example, the par helam davar shel tzibor, that is the bull that is brought when there was an unwitting sin of the community, and they become aware of this sin. And that's true with the other cases as well, like the par kohen gadol, etc. Umotzi ani elu, and I'm going to exclude these, meaning I'm going to exclude the se'irei haragalim and the se'irei roshei chodashim, she'ein mechapern al averas mitzvah yadua. They are not a kapara, they are not an atonement on a mitzvah that became known that it was committed. And Rashi explains, Marbani se'irei avodas kochavim l'toras par helam davar. Again, I'm going to include se'irei avodas zarah, for example, for the law of par helam davar, shemechapern al averas mitzvah yadua, because that's something that is a known avera that was committed. Kimoso sheshneim boy al chet hayadua. They both come for a sin that it became known that it was committed. Umotzi ani shel regalim, and I exclude the se'irei regalim shelo hayu shavano. They're not similar. Sharei ein domen lo b'chaparaso. They're not similar in terms of that atonement. She'elu boy al tumas mikdash v'kadashav, because they come as an atonement for tumas mikdash v'kadashav. Let's say a person again was tamei, he entered the mikdash or he touched kodesh. She'ein bo yediyah lo b'tchila v'lo b'sof. When you're talking about tumas mikdash v'kadashav, we're talking specifically where there was no yediyah, there was no knowledge, not in the beginning or the end. There was no knowledge of the sin. Shenitma, there was no knowledge of the tumah v'nichnas lamikdash. There was no knowledge of that tumah that he was tamei and entered the mikdash. Ve'eino makir, he didn't recognize it. V'lo hodela, wasn't known to him. Lo tumah Tamaso v'lo knisaso, not his being tamei, not his entering, kidamrinan b'shvuas, like we say in Meseches Shvuas. And so therefore, since when we're talking about the seirei hargalim, that is coming for Tumas Mikdash v'Kadashav, which is a sin that was not known, so therefore that should be excluded. That should not be the same as these other karbonos. And the Brisa continues, V'chiper, the Pasuk says that it's going to be an atonement. Afal pisha lo samach, we learn from there that it's going to be an atonement even though smicha was not done. There was no leaning done on the animal. That is not required for the atonement. V'nislach, and then there'll be forgiveness. Afal pisha lo nasan shirayim, even though there was no application, so to speak, of the shirayim, of the leftover blood. That's referring to the pouring of the leftover blood to the base of the Mizbeach. That also is not required for forgiveness, for atonement. Rashi explains, V'chiper mikol makom, V'chiper is like an inclusion. It means afal pishalo samchu olav zakenim, even though the elders did not do the smicha, v'nislach, and forgiveness, afal pishalo nasan shirayim liyasod mizbeach achitzon, even though the shirayim, the leftover blood, wasn't poured to the base of the outer mizbeach. Delo teima ho l'chsiva babehedya kveila deva'asa kasher asa nami alayu koyi. Maybe you'll say that repetition of v'yasa kasher asa, it's going on those halachas as well, smicha and the shirayim. Maybe you'll say they are required. Hilkach ma'itinu kra. Therefore, they're excluded by the pasuk. And the Brisa continues, Umaroisa lifsol behazos ulahachsher besmicha v'shirayim. How do you know that the hazos, those should be absolutely required? The applications of the blood, the sprinklings, those are required, otherwise it's disqualified. But smicha and shirayim, it's still kosher, those are not absolutely required. How do you know that? Amrid, we say as follows, posel behazos, when it comes to the applications of the blood, the sprinklings of the blood, there creates a disqualification. Shema akvos bechol makom, because in general we find that those are things that are required. Umachsharni besmicha v'shirayim, and when it comes to smicha and shirayim, those we say kosher. Shein ma'akvos bechol makom, that's not something that we find as ma'akev in other situations. Rashi explains, Shema akvos bechol makom, kidem efarish lekameh, we're going to explain this later on, bepara uvenegoyim, by the para aduma, by negoyim, by tsaras, we find that this is ma'akev, that the hazos are ma'akev, and smicha lo ma'akeves bi'alma, smicha in general is usually not ma'akev. Kedamrinim in parakam, we say that in the first parak, v'samach v'nirtza v'chi smicha mechaperes, that's what the Gemara says over there. And shvichas shirayim lo me'akva b'chatos hachitzona l'divrei akol, when it comes to the pouring of the shirayim, that is not required by the outer carbon chatos, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Mem Amud Aleph.